Well, good morning, everybody. I'm glad you could tune in. This is part of our weekly dialogue series, and we're going to be recording this. It's going to include a brief presentation from Wanda and possibly Gabriele, who's been involved with this project for a while, which I was interested to hear. Every Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, we have pretty much an open conversation, but once in a while, we'll have a brief more formal presentation on a subject that has come up. And this topic came up a couple weeks ago, and people really wanted to hear what was going on in our next door township, Williamstown Township. So our supervisor, Wanda Bloomquist, who's been with us several of these dialogues, is going to share sort of an update on where their project is. So Wanda, welcome. And thank you for being here. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, Leroy, for inviting me to this. I really enjoyed these. I came quite a bit when COVID was impacted us all, and I had a little more time in the mornings to join you. So it's good to be back. I do want to really, this credit of our green burial needs to go to Gabi. She reached out to me, I think it was in I'm going to draw a blank, 2018 or 2019, Gabi? I think it was 2018 when we went down to Watertown Township to a cemetery that had a green burial site. And we met with the director there. It was very interesting, the things that they've been doing. And so we kind of took that model and brought it back to the township. So we had to have the health department come out and check our cemetery soils for this green burial. And lo and behold, the water table was way too high. So that was a first kink in our plans, but I don't know, I'm sure you're all aware of the Red Cedar development down at Frandor. And with that development, they had to provide a compensating cut somewhere upstream along the Red Cedar River. So the choice spot just happened to be right next door to the cemetery. And we were able to work out a deal where the soils from that compensating cut were placed in our cemetery. And we were able to create approximately just a little over 2.5 acre site for our green burial. So that has settled. I think we raised it just about 8 feet in order to accommodate this, and it was a win-win situation. So now we have a beautiful compensating cut within the township that is really beneficial to all the wildlife we have in the area, and we have our green burial section of the township. So with that, we revised our ordinance to allow for the green burial. We did, I guess, a lot of design discussion, what we wanted to see there. And I will just kind of share a couple of things with you. One of the big things for our green burials to have it natural. So it won't be mowed. It will be a prairie with some trees there, and we have some trails that we're planning. Let's see here. This is our plan. And you can see down here where our traditional cemetery ends. We have our cemetery building here. And then
we're not seeing the plan, Wanda.
Oh, you're not? Okay.
Sorry.
Let's see. Let me go back. Okay. Now can you see the plan? Okay, great. So this is our plan. And we this area here that's going to be planted with native species, so that when you come down this drive, you'll see a footbridge here that kind of goes over a low area for drainage. And then these two areas here will be shepherd's walls. And those shepherd's walls will be there for people to put the remembrance of their loved one there. So name and date of, dates can go into that stonework there. And then you'll go into the trails. We'll have resting spots here and back here at the end of these trails. And then at the west end of the cemetery will be a scattering garden for those that want to scatter ashes. So that's the design that we ended up with. I'm going to show you a shepherd's wall. Let's see here. Not. So this is a shepherd's wall, and we'll have those curved, and then you'll see here some of these, it won't be this type of rock likely, but you'll have places where people can engrave on the walls. So it'll be really nice. It'll almost be like a park as you enter, because then once those plantings mature, you won't be able to see the rest of the cemetery. So the green burial, Gabi, I should let you talk about the green burial aspects of it. Gabi is very, I guess, enthusiastic about this, and she is what got the cemetery committee moving forward on this. And so I'm very thankful for all the advice she gave and encouragement. So Gabi, do you want to talk about the green burial aspect?
Sure. So as we know, in traditional cemeteries, we have vaults that people who have cemeteries like to have, so it can be easily mowed. If the casket is not encased in a vault, if the casket collapses during the decomposition, the ground will be uneven, and people who drive over it with a mower don't like this. This is basically the only reason a vault is in existence. And as you know, they can be either concrete or metal. So all of this is buried in our cemeteries, in addition to the embalming fluid that usually is used. So if you think about all the cemeteries in the United States, there is millions of tons of embalming fluid, and how much concrete and metal is buried for what reason, really. So the more traditional way of burying bodies, which in most of the world is done, and in the United States is still has been traditionally done by the Jewish community, is to just allow the body to decompose naturally, usually being in a wooden casket or in some material that is easily decomposable, such as a cloth shroud, for example. So if you want to create a green cemetery, you also have to consider that the bodies are not buried quite as deep. That scares some people because they think animals will start digging up corpses, or there may be a smell, but this is all misconception. So if you have some air still getting to the casket, the body will compose in an aerobic way with oxygen being involved. And this is a natural way of decomposition. If you think of all our roadkill that decomposes along the roads and finally disappears in a quite natural way. So if we bury the bodies about 4 feet deep rather than 6 feet, the decomposition will happen quite naturally. And in terms of environmental impacts, green burials have way less environmental impact. And well, so I guess we should just ask for questions, unless, Wanda, you have some more things to say about this. Oh, and I should add that the Jewish community, which has always asked not to have vaults because the body is supposed to be in contact with soil when it is buried, they have traditionally done sort of a get around the vault thing, that the vault is not on four sides of the enshrouded or body in a coffin, but that the bottom is basically left out. And so you have sort of a lid put over the casket. So you have a vault top, but then the bottom is in contact with soil. So that has been a way of the Jewish, and I also think the Muslim community, getting around this vault obsession in the United States. But we are proposing not having a vault at all and just burying the body. And I think in Williamstown, we agree it can be any kind of decomposable matter that the body is wrapped or encased in. So we will accept any kind of wooden coffin or a cloth. There are other ways of encasing the body that are all natural. And I guess, and we don't allow any kind of embalming fluid. And I have actually called around several funeral homes in the area if they are willing to go this way, because if the body is not embalmed, that changes a little bit how people can approach the funeral homes. But there are several that are totally supportive of this. Some are not, and some are a little bit hesitant, but it should not be a problem to have a green burial and have a funeral home involved as well. So, yeah.
So I will say that this is something our residents have asked about as well. We've seen a lot more questions about this since we've adopted this, and especially since a lot of the residents saw the work that was going on at the cemetery, what we were going to do with that. So we are in the stages of getting bids to do the trail work and the planting for us. And our staff will begin laying out the spaces. So the way the spaces will be sold as they typically are in a cemetery, but there will not be any headstones. There'll only be, unless you're on a trail, you can get a trail marker, which maybe would be a tree that we have approved and in certain locations, or a large rock that could be engraved on and would sit along the trail. Otherwise, there will be no markers for the burial, just other than the shepherd's wall. So it will be quite natural, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I know our residents are as well. So when we did the green burial, we also allow it in the older part of the cemetery. So if you have a loved one that's already buried and you want to do the green burial, you have that option to do so there as well. It just will become a mowed area, not be left in the natural state. So.
Well, thank you so much for your presentations, and Gabi for joining us. I'm sure there's lots of questions. If you wouldn't mind using the raise hand function, and we'll just throw it up for, I think Zoom will keep track of the order of hands raised, hopefully. Otherwise, just unmute yourself and ask a question. But first up is Sarah, and thank you again so much.
Thank you for this. I have been really interested in this topic, so I'm thrilled that you could come and share with us. I have a million questions, but the first one I have is, what is maybe you don't have the exact cost, but what is a way of helping with the cost of maintenance and that kind of thing? Is there going to be a set cost for doing it, burying, or versus with the ashes, or how are you managing that part?
Yes, there'll be a set cost for burial. Once we get to that point, I'm not sure, I'm assuming it might be very similar to what we charge for opening and closing now currently. So I don't anticipate much of a change. The only thing the staff will need to do is they'll have to mound the dirt and the soil in order so that as it settles, as the body decomposes, we don't have indentations and it levels itself out.
The second one.
We can come back to you, Sarah, for your other 999,000 questions, but Athena, you're up.
I just had a question, and then I wanted to make a comment about the traditional burial site. Are you saying that if someone wanted to have a green burial in the other area and have a stone, that would be allowed? Or are you talking about people who have already passed and had a traditional burial?
Oh, well, say a husband and wife bought this plots together and one passed away 20 years ago and the other one wants to be buried next to him or her, but they want the green burial. So we could still do that. They can have a stone there. It's just, and it in the end, it will look like a traditional burial. It's just that it will be green and you'll see a mound there for some time until that settles, but then it would be mowed just like the rest of the cemetery.
Had you thought of anything kind of in between where a stone would be allowed, so it looks traditional, but the process would be green?
Just in the traditional area.
So that would be allowed, even
it would be allowed, yes.
That's
the traditional area.
When my husband passed away a couple of years ago, it was just so hard to find anything, and I ultimately went to Glendale, and it was green insofar as he did not get embalmed. He was buried the next day. We had a small pine box that was Amish made, and I went with Pray because they had them right away. They had many of them available. But I had to negotiate the vault, and the way we finally got around that is he said, well, I guess we do it for Jewish people, so I guess we could do it for you, which is not having the bottom closed.
Mm-hmm.
But it was still a deep burial, but there were a lot of the elements, and of course the preparing of the body that I was involved in, and all of that was a wonderful way of doing it and having the ceremony in the home. You know, so it's something that is really missing. I had been reading, and I'm Greek Orthodox, but I was reading a book on towards a Christian ending, and the philosophy of green burial was very strong in that, and that helped to inspire and guide me in doing this, because it's so new. So I laud you in all of your efforts.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I mean, there are two things I would like to say. So we also, within the new part, the green part, we do have pathways, walkways, you know, the little spiral you saw, these are walkways. And if you choose to be buried along those walkways, you can have a stone. It's just not a typical gravestone, but more of a field stone that can be engraved. So we will have that option. And then the other thing I would like to say, I mean, we're talking like green burial, we are just inventing this, but this is how people have been buried, I mean, forever, and are still buried in most of the world. And we are just doing what has always been done. This whole vault and embalming is within the last, well, since the Civil War, people have been embalmed because the soldiers needed to be transported home. And that's what started the embalming. And I don't even know when the vault thing was, but this whole thing is very, very new. And hopefully it will go away.
The simplicity of the whole process for the family was really lovely also.
Yeah, and the costs are just skyrocketing. So many people, I think, are actually looking for alternatives not because they think they're so green, but because they just don't want to pay tens
In
of
our
thousands,
case,
thousands of
the,
dollars plus.
the funeral director laughed and said, "Don't think you're going to save any money for this," you know, and I didn't. But I think that was, I don't know, that was kind of a crude aspect of it, and that didn't concern me at the time. But I do think that that shouldn't have been that way either, because there was no embalming, there was nothing, you know, going on.
And there are ways. I am very aware of all the prices of all the funeral homes because I have done audits on that. And yeah, it takes, the problem is that people don't think ahead. And as soon as you have a dead body in the house, you are not starting to call around 5 funeral homes and compare prices because you don't have the time. But if we would all do a little more planning, because even though you don't want to talk about dying, we will all die. And so a little planning can actually do save you money if you don't want to pay $9, $10, $11, $12,000 for a funeral.
Well, the problem is I couldn't find anybody else who even knew anything about green burial. This was the only funeral home that even had a box that even was willing not to embalm and so forth. And so there was a premium associated with that, so to speak.
I give talks about that, but this is not the right forum for that. Yeah.
Let's move on a couple of questions here. I'm going to let Rob McKenzie speak because he has another meeting in a couple minutes, and then Bruce.
So question I got is for the maintenance part of it. So what do you do about locating the body after it's been buried for a couple of years when you're going to dig next to it?
Well, just the same as we do the rest of the other cemetery, it'll be marked and there'll be pins in the ground so that they can find the spaces, and it'll all be mapped just like our traditional cemetery is. So, so it'll be very similar.
So traditionally burying, at least at Glendale, we use a prod to locate the vault. You're not going to be able to locate a body or bones. And then if you say you don't, the problem with the maintenance part of it digging up next to another body, if you disinter a body part, now you've got the health department coming in.
Yeah, we've made this the plot sizes large enough that that should not be an issue.
Okay.
So
Those were my two main questions.
yeah, and then since they're not as deep, I think that helps as well.
Okay.
And you don't have that huge vault that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
That you have to dig the hole that large.
Good. I just worry about digging up another bone. I mean, we got part of our cemetery that was still wooden boxes, and we can't locate them. So like section 1, when they were buried in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it's very sketchy. I don't like digging up there, but sometimes we still have to. So
one of the things we did is called, so you'll have to forgive me if I butcher this description, but we did a LiDAR kind of a ultrasound of the ground to locate all the burials. And like we find that our drive goes over some of the old grave sites, but that helped us to locate where, especially the old part where maybe people were buried and they didn't have a headstone, and you know, helped us determine exactly, you know, hopefully who was where, kind of thing. And I know Mac would highly recommend that, our sexton. We're looking at doing that at our Foot Cemetery as well, which is, I think, even older than Summit Cemetery.
Okay.
Thanks, Rob. How about Bruce and then Valerie?
I got a couple of questions actually, because this is pretty interesting to me and my wife. What kind of barriers did you run into in the whole process, aside from the water table issue?
Really, I would say that was the only issue that came up, was with the health department. And when I approached them originally about doing a green burial, they were a little hesitant that they had any right to say anything other than the water table, since they're not in vaults and, you know, concerns as far as, you know, floating. So, so actually it went really well. And when we brought that fill in, that took care of the issue that the health
Mhm.
department had. The rest of it's just been within the township, you know, making that decision to move forward.
And maybe that Gabby might be the person to answer this question. How do you keep a funeral home out of the process? Is that possible?
Keep it out of the process, of the entire process?
Yes.
In Michigan, you can't. This is different in different states. In Michigan, a funeral director has to issue the death certificate, and the body has to be transported by a funeral director. That's the only thing. The body never has to go to a funeral home. As Athena was saying, you could keep the body in your house, which, depending where the person passes away, is more or less practical. But if somebody dies in hospice at home, let's say, which is the easiest situation, the death will be declared, and then you can keep the body actually for as long as you want, believe it or not. You are actually in possession of the body. And then at some point, a funeral director has to transport the body to the cemetery. There is something called direct burial or direct cremation. But the transporting has to be done in Michigan by a funeral director. In other states, you can actually transport the body yourself.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Am I up next? I just wonder about, can you just share sort of relative cost at the different options? And what if you wanted to use a funeral home in terms of just the viewing part, that you maybe needed a space to have, you know, visitors and so forth? Would that work? Whoever, Gabi?
Well, yes, you can. So the funeral, unfortunately, the law is not that clear on how bodies have to be preserved for viewing. So if you don't embalm the body, many funeral directors will interpret the law that you can't have a viewing for more than just the closest family, because they declare the body a biohazard item, which it is not. I mean, dead people do not make other people sick, but it is what it is. So most funeral homes in the area will allow you to have a family viewing with a body that just has been refrigerated. If you want to have a big gathering with the body being there in an open casket, that is not an option so far. But you can always have a gathering where the body is not there. I mean, you know, you have to sort of weigh and discuss with them what's possible. One of the very expensive items in any burial is sort of the set fee of a body basically coming to a funeral home, and they will charge you all their overhead is passed on to you as part of the expenses. So to get around this, every funeral home by law has to have an option called direct cremation or direct burial. And that means the body goes from wherever the person passes away directly either to the crematory or to the cemetery. And that is your least expensive option. And every funeral home has to have that option. You just have to ask for it. And otherwise, they have all of these a la carte services that can add up. They have to give you all of their prices by law. And it's just a matter of going through them and seeing what do you really need and not be talked into an extensive package. And hopefully by this year, the FDA is going to change the rules so that all funeral homes have to have their prices online, which right now is not the case. They have to give you prices over the phone if you call them or when you stop by. But it is not easy, I can tell you that from experience, to get the prices for all the things that a funeral home has to offer. It is a little bit of work. And so that's why many people, they go to the very first one they have used in the family and they pay whatever they tell you. And if you start comparing, there are huge, huge differences in prices. And I can only recommend to everybody, just start looking early.
Just in regard to the burial part, can you give a rough idea of what those costs are?
So currently for an internment for a resident, it's $600. And for a non-resident, it's $900.
What does internment mean exactly? Put in the ground and cover up?
Yes, exactly. So I'm gonna say one of the things we'll be discussing is maybe reviewing our fees. Now, whether we'll raise that fee for the natural area, I'm not sure. Staff was somewhat hesitant because of the extra work that goes in as far as, the additional soil, et cetera, mounding, and especially in the traditional areas. So we may not raise it in the natural burial area, but maybe if you want a green burial in the traditional area, we may find that has an increased cost because that's where they spend a lot of their time maintaining the cemetery. So I don't think it'll be much different.
And that would be in addition to the cost of the piece of land that you're buying to go into, correct?
Right. And so right now our burial spaces are 600 for resident and 1,000 for non-resident.
Thank you.
So, sure.
Sounds like a bargain. I just have a question. Is there anybody that wants to champion this type of effort in Meridian Township? You don't have to answer that right away, but it might be interesting to sort of think about next steps if we want to consider this option locally, or not that Williamstown Township isn't local as well. So you don't have to all raise your hands at once, but Valerie? Oh, awesome. I think Sarah is up next.
My question, go ahead.
Go ahead.
My question is, can you be embalmed and then be scattered? Is that possible?
So if you are scattered, you have to be cremated. And yes, you can be embalmed and then you can be cremated.
Sorry, that's what I mean. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, if it is a good choice or not, you have to think about this, but absolutely, you can be embalmed and then you can be cremated a couple of days later. Usually the embalming happens because people think the body won't decompose for the next, I don't know, several years, depending on the salesperson. They'll tell you your body stays beautiful for 100 years. So people usually don't think about embalming and then, the body is going to be cremated a couple of days later. But as I said, if you want to have an open casket viewing with more than the most immediate family, a funeral home will not allow this unless you are embalmed. So if that's important, yes, then you need to be embalmed and then you will be cremated and then you can be scattered.
Okay, thank you.
Gabi, I just wondered if you wanted to, what are the chemicals in embalming that maybe I'm sure they're not very good for
it's formaldehyde. And so that's a chemical that can cause cancer, and it's also not good for the environment. So, and I don't want to be too crude about this, but the process of embalming is a very invasive process to the body. Most people, I don't think, understand what happens to a body while it is embalmed. And you can go and look this up, but it's a very invasive process. And I think many people wouldn't think about embalming if they knew what it means to the body. I'll leave it at that.
Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. I know there's probably some more questions, but let's just open it up to anybody who has questions or comments they want to make, and then we will wrap this up around 10 o'clock.
I put a question in the chat, but I might as well ask it in person. Are there restrictions to where ashes can be scattered? Does it have to be in a specific designated area, say as like a cemetery, or can I be spread around my backyard or Disneyland?
It's a don't ask, don't tell thing.
Ah.
There is no real law about it. So as long as you are discreet and yes.
You
Okay.
do need permission of a landowner. Michigan, I looked this up last week because we keep talking about this and I dig it. If you've got ashes to scatter, ashes are not considered in Michigan to be a hazardous waste. You can scatter them, but you can't trespass to do it. Don't ask, don't tell is a good approach, I suppose, but I can't endorse that as a public official.
Yeah, thank you.
Is there the same cost for scattering as for the green burial at your facility?
Well, at this time, we have not done a fee schedule for the scattering, and that'll be interesting to see how that conversation goes with the cemetery committee. But we will have a specific area that we would like to use for scattering. I do believe that people have scattered on their plot as well, so that they're next to a loved one. But I think that's kind of rare, and so we will allow cremains also in the natural burial area. We'll have cremain spots because of the way the trails can, weave through the plots. It's not in a grid pattern. So we will have cremain locations as well. And those would just need to be in a wood box or cardboard box or something that can decompose.
Valerie?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, like in Meridian, and it's probably the same in Williamstown, the Parks Commission will accept a donation of a bench, that maybe has your loved one, embossed on it. And also, I think if you could work it out, then you maybe also plant a native tree and some native plants. And I suppose no one would know if you put the ashes in there, but it kind of works well. I mean, we're talking about community planning here and kind of more connection with the earth and so forth. I think maybe it's a program that might go well with talking about green burial. Is I know that you can't say put the ashes there, but it's a way of remembering a loved one, using the earth and so forth. So just a thought. Thank you.
So yeah, I don't know if you've ever researched, they do have urns that you can order that come with a tree already, and you can plant the whole thing. And that's a tree planted with the cremains. So we do have locations in the cemetery that, as far as the trees, they'll be able to do something like that. And then there's that area across the front. We may decide that could also be, a tree in remembrance of someone, a loved one. And we have that throughout the township. We actually have some here at the hall with a little plaque that goes with the tree in remembrance of someone. So yeah, I think it's great for planning. Mm-hmm.
How many plots do you have at the cemetery in the green burial area? So like how long is this going to last for the space that you have? Oh gosh, I'm going to draw a blank, but I think we have something like 1,300 spaces there. Does that sound right, Gabby?
Yeah.
It's a lot.
Okay.
It's a lot.
Were you going to say something, Gabi?
I just wanted to say that if there is another forum, I do give talks on planning funerals and costs and funeral homes and comparisons and options. This is not the right forum, but if anybody is interested in this, you can send me an email and I will be happy to come and talk to your group. Like I have done that to different groups, and if that's that's.
That is a very generous offer. Are you willing to share your email in the chat window?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that.
So there is a website too, the Green Burial Council, that has a lot of information on green burials. And I think we could put that in the chat as well.
Sorry about that.
See if I
Well,
can find that.
This has been a fascinating conversation. How about any of you who haven't had a chance to ask a question yet or just make a comment? Really,
Where
go ahead.
are you along in your approval process? It sounds like you haven't got quite, like the ordinance isn't quite approved and such. Like how close are you?
So the ordinance is approved.
Okay.
So everything's been approved. What we haven't started yet is the planting of the prairie,
Okay.
putting the trails in, and then gridding out the spaces.
Okay. Do you anticipate being able to start receiving bodies this year, or is that like a next year timeframe? Just curious.
I'm not sure. I would say it might be more next year because
Okay.
staff is pretty busy through the summer with stuff.
Oh, I can't imagine that.
Yeah. So I think, once fall arrives, they could start gridding out, and
Okay.
I think we would, they've been talking about how they're going to start the process because it'd be nice. We want to have the spaces along the trails available right away. And so how to grid that out for people.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
You're just going to have to wait, Brian. Athena, feel free to just unmute yourself if you have a question or a comment.
I wanted to say to Valerie about, using a funeral home. Having a viewing in the home can accommodate a lot of people, and just the fluidity, the organicity, the naturalness, and the lack of disruption of, if you believe in body and soul, in that whole process just is so, it's just quieting in some way. It helps make the whole thing seem part of the way things are, without having to have a disruption to all this planning, going to a funeral home. You tell people to whom it matters, and there are ways of communicating quickly. And, neighbors come in, they help. It all becomes part of one large family. It works really quite well. And I just remembered when I was 3, when my grandfather died, and we had a viewing in the home. And that's what kind of inspired me to want to do that, because I hadn't seen it since. But so I just, I don't think, even though that's the mode, I don't think it has to be. And you could have music that you want. You can do all kinds of things that make the whole thing feel very, very natural and comfortable.
I will say I found hospice to be very helpful in all of this as well, when my mother passed away. And it was actually a very nice experience, and with minimal contact with the funeral home. So.
Yeah, I'm a death midwife as well, and I have also learned about home funerals. But I think that our society is as large not ready to go there. But I think, Athena, I can totally agree with everything you're saying. Yeah.
Wow, this seems like a natural extension of, the whole home birth concept.
Yeah.
And a more natural experience in birthing, which, when I was in that phase of life, I was searching for and was able to find a good alternative. But this is very inspiring. Thank you so much for this.
Do you think that we're going to, as we try to, especially because I'm really wanting to be able to get this in just a little bit township over, do you think that there's going to be pushback with lobbyists and stuff in terms of the funeral homes that are going to make this more difficult to have happen? Do you think, or are you? I mean, from what it's sounding like, you haven't had a whole lot of pushback, so that makes me feel like it may not be as big of a issue, maybe.
Well, I can tell you from talking to many different funeral homes, some funeral directors say this is what is going to happen. They 100% agree that this is the future, that funeral homes need to change. They can still make money. It's not like we're taking business away. And there definitely is a role for funeral directors and funeral homes, because not everybody wants, like what Athena says, having a body in their house, clearly. So they just have to change how their system operates. And there are many who absolutely say this is where we need to go. And some of them are more hesitant because they have done things always in certain ways, and they will only change if the consumer wants it differently. This is how it's going to work. If people come to the funeral home and say, I want the body be refrigerated, I don't want embalming, I want a pine casket, then the funeral homes, if this is what people want, they will change. That's easy. Yeah.
I would encourage anybody if you want to see a green burial area that's already in place. I can't remember the name of the funeral home, Gabby. I mean, the cemetery, but it's in Williamstown Township.
Yeah.
And it is beautiful. It overlooks the lake. It's totally separate from the traditional aspect. You would get a lot of, I mean, really, it was a very inspirational journey that we took to visit them. And the director there was more than helpful. I mean, he answered all our questions and, sent us in the directions as far as, doing things the right way. So it was a very good trip. And hopefully we'll have our cemetery started so that next year you can see what our green burial section looks like.
Yeah, it's called the Preserve All Saints Cemetery. I'll send out the link.
Oh, thank you, Gabby.
Mm-hmm.
Just to Valerie, I'd be willing to be a kind of resource and be available, but it's still quite raw for me. So that's why I didn't volunteer right away, but I'm sure I'll be available to help you in some way if you launch that initiative.
What do you think in terms of, do you think that typically the green burials are just an addition onto a cemetery that's already there? Or do you think that there are green burials that are like, oh, this plot of land is good and we get the approvals or whatever and that's done? Or do you think it's just more that like what you did was it's just part of a cemetery that's there?
Well, we were very fortunate to have this space that hadn't been mapped out or utilized yet. So for us, that was really good. But like in our zoning ordinance, we have a section for cemeteries. So anybody could come in and buy a plot of land as long as they meet our guidelines and put in a green cemetery. And I think that that's happening, that there are quite a few private ones.
Yep.
So, I don't know, you could certainly look at that, and I don't know how many people are into it. I did pull up some stats that there, in 2019, there were only, 240 green burial cemeteries. So, and I think there's one in Peninsula Township. For some reason, I saw that in my files. Peninsula Township had one, but so somebody could create a private cemetery that's all green.
Yeah, there are a couple actually in Michigan. Some of them are related to often Catholic churches, and there are Christian cemeteries. We should also mention that there are sort of different categories of green cemeteries. There are very, very pure green cemeteries where people who have had hip replacements and you can't have those kinds of metal parts in there, versus I think we are taking a more whatever is in the body stays in the body approach. And the Green Council, the Green Burial Council, they have sort of a organic certificate, a green certificate. We are not striving to be officially declared a green cemetery according to their guidelines, which I think what we're doing is fantastic and it's will work for us. And so we don't need to have that stamp and jump through a whole lot of hoops that gives us extra stamps. I think, you can sort of create your own as long as you're good with the health department and your guidelines with the cemeteries. But yeah, there are some are much more stricter than others. And so you can find the one that works for your community, which I think is a good thing.
Kendra?
Thank you for the excellent presentation, all the work you're doing, Wanda and Gabi. It's fantastic. And so I look forward to what help we might be able to do in Meridian, but I just wanted to let folks know in case people didn't know, we're already involved in some initiatives of planning, Native Meridian and all that kind of stuff. So, it just can be an extension of that. So.
Yes, Meridian is, you guys are great neighbors. I just love all the things you guys are doing.
Yes, exactly.
Well, you've shared a number of green projects that you've been up to, so I hope you'll come back and share some more of that. And we have about 5 more minutes. Did you have another question, Kendra? Oh, okay. Let's open it up to anybody else who wants to make any parting comments or has any remaining questions. I'll just add one about donating your body to science has been an option. Just another thing to throw out there. Do Wanda or Gabi have any comments related to that you wanted to share?
Yes, I do. I think it's a wonderful option, and we have Michigan State University close here. So this is not, this is something one should definitely consider. The only thing that you always should have is a plan B. And I'm saying this because I always tell this people and they don't believe me, but it just happened to friends of mine that if you pass away and you have been ill for a long time, you have lost a lot of weight, Michigan State University and any place where you donate your whole body will make the decision if they take the body or not at the time of death. And if the body is not in a state that they want it to be, very often because the body has lost so much weight that they can't use the body really, then they will say no. And that just happened to the father of a friend of mine. The father was very sure he would always be donated to science, and then all of a sudden he wasn't. So you always need to have another plan, and that is what kind of a funeral would you choose if the body can. And there are many other places where you can donate body parts. Some of them will even pay for it. Again, there is a lot to learn about this whole process. You just need to be informed.
Thank you.
And as you used to pick up the body and that was free, and now I think they stopped doing this, and I don't know if it's a pandemic thing, if they will go back, but right now you do have to find a funeral director again who will transport the body.
Yeah, that story happened to me with my mom. 1 o'clock in the morning calling places. Well, MSU won't take the body. Let's see, I've got a good compost pile in my backyard. Just kidding. No, it was a bit of a, I can accentuate what you just said, Gabby. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions or suggestions?
If there's no other questions on the green burial, I do have another project I'd like to put a little plug in for if I could. But I'll wait and make sure the other questions are answered. Okay.
Everyone's holding their breath. Go ahead.
Okay, so we are planting a forest at the Township Park on Grand River. And we're doing plantings next Saturday, the 30th, and then also on the 7th. We're planting, I think it's 525 trees that are going in. And we've been working with Bill Schneider of Wild Types as far as species and the layout of the forest. We have scouts planting 2,000 acorns this Sunday. So if you're interested, I will send Leroy the sign up genius for those weekends, and you can put together a team to come out and plant 50 trees and spend some time out in the township park. If you've never been there, it's really a nice park. And we're really excited about creating a forest. So anyway.
Awesome.
Is that the one by the behind the ball fields?
Yeah, it's going to be on the west end behind the bus stop. In that quadrant there is where the forest is going. So
Awesome.
That's really nice area back there.
yeah, it'll be about a 12-acre forest, hopefully in about 20 years.
I want to give Bruce credit for bringing up the issue about, wouldn't a green burial be appropriate for a nature center? And I'm just wondering, Gabby or Wanda's thoughts on that. We have a lot of gems of nature centers in our region.
Well, I thought of that preserve you have up on Venata Road, where the farm is. That to me would be where all the prairie is. I think they had it planted in sunflowers, and that's gorgeous. But we did we've had people ask about that at our park. So that's something at this point we haven't addressed, but I don't see why it wouldn't be a good idea. I mean, really, it's a beautiful park.
Yeah, I think it is all about educating your constituents, really, because as soon as they hear there are dead bodies buried somewhere without being embalmed, and some people don't like that idea. And so it's all about going out and giving seminars and educating people and trying to change the mindset. And that may take a while. So slowly.
You know, another thing, we've had residents who bury loved ones on their property, and that's also allowed. You should be aware of that.
Yeah.
To circle back, if you throw that link out to Leroy, I'm curious about that. Can I bring family members?
Oh yeah, you
Okay.
can sign up as a team, and it'd be a great family adventure to plant a bunch of trees. So
No promises, but I'll look into it.
okay, thank you, Brian.
Any other parting comments? Anybody? Well, thank you so much. This has been a great hour, information filled, and I hope you all come back next week. It'll be free for all conversation on whatever topics people want to follow up on. I'm sure there'll be more talk about this. And if you want a recording of today's hour, please feel free to let me know. Sarah, did you have a remaining parting comment?
No, that was just me. Thank you so much. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Oh,
Yeah.
very
Thank
welcome. Thanks for the invite.
Yes,
Thanks.
thank you very much.
Thank
Good
you,
luck.
Gabriele. You guys have a good week.
Bye-bye.